All right, so I guess I'll just wait for folks to join, but I hope you guys all had a great start to the new year. I know there's a lot going on in our country right now, but I hope personally for each and every person that the new year's gotten off to a good start. I'm really excited to get into our topic today. And I'm already unmuted, computer. Okay, sorry. So, I'll just wait a couple more minutes to see if more folks want to join, and if not, I'll jump right in. But just to catch you guys up on some of the stuff I've been doing in the background, I took a few weeks off of doing the lives just because I have had a lot of work to do. With 2026 is going to be full of travel for me, and I've done this thing where I agreed to doing a bunch of different conferences, and I realized that all the due dates for the presentations were going to be coming up in January, and I was like, well, I'm going to need time. So I've been working on a bunch of different new presentations for different children conferences. I'm going to be at Expo working with John from Humane Innovations, which is going to be super fun. We're doing a whole workshop on not just defensive handling, but low stress, reduced stress handling, and how we can not only bring animals in from capturing them, maybe they're strays, to how we're handling intakes, what we can do with intakes to not only ensure that we're doing low stress, but we're gathering behavioral data during that time frame, and then continue in care how we should be handling animals. So it's going to be a really fun day-long learning lab, I think they're called, and I'm really excited to be there. But between that and my Tacoma trip with Trish McMillan and all of the other conferences, I'm like, oh boy. So yeah, so took some time off and ready to kind of roll into the new year. I've pre-planned a lot of the lives, and that way I could give you all a heads up on when I'll be hosting them. Ideally, I have them all planned to a place where I will not have to cancel them, but sometimes things do come up, and if that's what happens, something happens and I can't make it, I certainly try to give as much notice as possible, that I wouldn't be hosting those. For example, next week I'm randomly going to Colorado for a trip, shelter trip, and and I'll be at the airport, so I can still do the live, so I'm not going to cancel it. But so that's kind of what's been up with me. I hope that you guys are off to a good start, and I'm looking forward to talking about our topic today. So today what I wanted to focus on is using the fear-free model in shelters, and how we can actually use that not only to teach our staff, but actually use data based from the FAS scoring chart, so that we can track behavioral data over the course of the animal's stay, and a variety of different ways we can use that, and why. Why do we want that information? So I'm going to start with that. If this is your first time joining, I know a few folks who are here have been here before, but I wanted to just reintroduce myself if this is your first time. Katrina, I think you've been here before, but I'm Laurie Lawless. Sometimes people watch these on the website, and I run shelter behavior integrations, and my whole mission and goal is to really help shelters find ways to integrate behavioral programs and better welfare into the care of our dogs in shelters, and further making sure that we're doing valid assessments, we're giving dogs the best placement opportunities and all of that. And I like to do things in the most adaptable way to each and every shelter. So you don't have to have all these big fancy things or fancy systems. We can really build those with very little tools for that. So for example, I just worked with a shelter locally here, and we wanted to upgrade their kennels. And instead of, purchasing all new kennels and moving things around, we were able to just flip some kennel doors around and then add some visual barriers, using some plastic panels that we purchased at Home Depot for like $40 a sheet. And now we've got the ability for dogs to walk past each other without freaking out, and rotations in the morning are going to be more efficient. And so those are the projects that I like to do and I love to share, because shelter's just what I live and breathe, and dogs is my thing. So yeah, so that's who I am. It's what I do. I'm glad you're here. So let's get into talking about our Fear-Free Shelters program. So I know that many of us in here already know what it is, but just in case you don't know, so our Fear-Free Shelters program, not ours. It's not mine, certainly. The Fear-Free Shelters program is a branch of the Fear-Free programs. And so they created this as an amazing resource for folks who are working in sheltering to have a free kind of systematic way of watching this training. The course itself takes about 4 or 5 hours. You get a certification afterwards, and what it's really beneficial for is once everybody, even the leadership teams, are familiar with the material, have been through the course, it gives everybody a set universal language on how not only are we identifying stress, we're communicating about stress better than we've ever communicated before, because instead of labeling behaviors, we're now able to talk more about behavior objectively. And the other piece of it too is learning how we can set our environments up to reduce stress. And when we do see dogs who are under stress, we know that we have to make some type of intervention. So if you haven't taken the Fear-Free course, or the folks in your shelter haven't, it's something I highly advocate for, because in America specifically, this is where I mostly work and have worked and have been, is our shelters all operate so differently. And we are kind of all over the place as far as um, how we talk about behavior, how we incorporate our behavior programs, whether we have behavior staff, maybe we don't have behavior staff. And so I think that this is a really great program to have some type of systematic place to start when we're all just talking about behavior. So I highly recommend it. And that's why I wanted to talk about this today, because I wanted to talk to you guys about how I'm starting to utilize it when I'm working with shelters, and how we're going about with documenting behavior. So again, it's a free resource, and it's an awesome resource. Let me see if I think I pulled up the, nope, that's not it. Here we go. I have pulled it up here. So I'm going to drop that really quickly, Fear-Free Shelters, into the chat course. And there we go. Okay, so I'm dropping that into the chat for you guys if you've never checked out before. And so I think the first thing we talk about is who should take the course. So if you have a large shelter, and like as I mentioned, it's a pretty long course. You're gonna think I'm like selling this program for them, but it's for, I'm not making any money off this. But but you really want to start at least with the kennel manager or shelter animal care manager. It does cover cats too. I know I'm super dog focused often, but anybody who's overseeing really the care of the dog and cat programs at your shelters, them, and then everybody that falls underneath. I think that it should be something that is really starting in that department. And then I think from there, we can branch out into the leadership members of the other team. Because if you at least have the leadership members of the other teams, they're going to be able to communicate better with the animal care department, and they're going to be able to communicate better when we're talking about more difficult or complex behavior challenges. They're going to have some type of baseline understanding for that. The rest of the staff definitely underneath those departments can certainly take that, but at least once we get that leadership, the leadership team members in place, they can kind of start disseminating information, even if their staff hasn't caught up yet. But at least with our animal care staff, we should definitely be fully versed in, the FAS scoring, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. We want to be able to talk in objective body language. And what I sometimes see with shelters is that the staff members go through the course and then everybody's like, great, cool, you've been through the course and that's that. And it almost becomes a lost lore. It's like, again, with anything that you're doing in anything is you, if you're not using it, you lose it, right? So I would love, and what I've started doing with shelters is saying like, hey, do you guys remember all that stuff you learned in the Fear-Free Shelters? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, okay, we're going to use that now when we move forward with documenting. So once you kind of have your staff knowing how to uh, do the observational stuff, they know how to set the environment up a little bit better. They have this kind of baseline understanding of what does it look like when an animal is stressed. We can start actually working those FAS scoring into our documentation, SOPs, into our forms, whether it's a kennel board, whether it's a whiteboard, whether it is documented in a software program like Shelter Love. this is a really nice way from a management perspective, if you're, especially if you're trying to triage and work with many animals across the board. If you can just look through at a snapshot of like their day to day where their FAS score is, then we're going to be able to kind of get a bird's eye view of what's going on with that animal. So, for an example, one shelter, what we started doing just last summer was on the dog's first 3 days in the shelter. They've always had for the last few years had a small sheet that gets put on the kennel where staff write notes about the dog's interaction. So, what was it like leashing the dog? What was it like getting them out of the kennel? Any behavior concerns? Did you see any fear? Did you see any, yeah, reactive behavior, all of those different things that we might want to start documenting or start acknowledging, so we can get to know the animal, but also to give us some type of preemptive warning if there's a red flag, right? That we need to flag that this dog may have some behavioral challenges we need to look into. But what happens is it's great those notes get put into the computer system, but when you're managing 30 or 40 dogs in your kennel, as this one particularly does, it became really apparent that none of us really have time to sit and read all the notes, especially when some of them are like, they did great. We went for a walk. It was super fun. Awesome. We love to see those notes, and I love that they're documented because we can utilize that information to create those adoption profiles and figure out what the best placement options. But it can be really overwhelming. And when we're trying to read through all of that, some of the things that are red flags may get kind of stuck in the weeds. So, what we did is just next to the interaction type. So it was, morning walk. You know, they could write their little note, and then we put a little indicator right next to that in a different box. It said FAS at best and FAS at worst. So during that entire interaction, where were they on their stress levels during the best time of that interaction, and where were they at their worst time? So if maybe it was like a 0 and a 0, or a 0 and a 2, great. It's totally normal to see some anxiety, especially for a new dog. But if we see, the dog was at a 0 or a 1, and all of a sudden at some point during that interaction, it became a 3 or a 4, we know that there's something in there that caused this dog's behavior to kind of jump pretty extremely. Another indication would be, let's say the person went to go get the dog out of the kennel and the dog was showing some 4 or 5s. So if you look at the chart, I did put it into the chat box there for you if you want to kind of follow along with that. I guess I could share my screen. That would probably make sense. There we go. So yeah, if we're looking at this, you guys, I hope you see this correct screen there. I think that it's the right screen. Can you guys see that? And just give me a thumbs up in the chat. Would be great. Awesome. Thanks you. Thank you, Rebecca. So you can see there, like if we go to get a dog out of a kennel, like many times, where it's their first day, they might be really freaked out. They might be showing some barrier reactivity, and they're at like a 4. And you're like, oh man, this dog is pretty intense. But after going out for a 10-minute walk, they can come down to a 1. What we are looking at is behavioral resiliency. We are seeing a dog who was very stressed and with human interaction was then able to bring it down. That's a really important data fact. So in those initial 3 days, what we can do is kind of gauge a sense of this dog's overall stress level. So if we are able to either set it up on a whiteboard, for, different shelters are going to have different ways of doing this. So they might have a dog walk board instead of something on the kennel. So instead of maybe a kennel sheet, we've got a walking board. And next to where you would put your initials and the time you took the dog out, you put another box and then, maybe a little dash through it. And then you can add FAS best, FAS worst. And that way, when the kennel supervisor, the manager comes in and they want to do their daily rounds, for example, they can look and see, oh, wow, like that dog's really having a hard time consistently. Or, oh, wow, that dog is having a really good time. And then all of a sudden there's a 5 on there. What's up with that? And now what they can do is they can go into those notes and those observational points and say, okay, where's what happened? And from a management perspective, what we're always trying to do is, so not only take care of the dogs in our care, but we want to support our staff. So if we have a way for our staff to communicate clearly and effectively that there's a challenge, obviously, if it's an emergency, that should be reported immediately. But if we're trying to get that bird's eye view without having to get into the weeds every single day, which is very time consuming. If you've ever done shelter management, at a shelter that is actually pretty much any shelter. But if you have more than 3 or 4 leadership team members, you know that you're sucked into meetings like pretty much all the time. And it can be really hard to be like, oh, how is that dog doing? How is that dog doing? And going and checking in with the staff and doing these things. So again, it's giving you that nice bird's eye view. So in other ways that you can do that, so you've got your walk board, you could do it on individual dog care sheets. And then my favorite way is always going to be doing some type of report system. So my favorite program so far that I've used is Shelter Love because you can make tags, you can make templates basically for different interaction types. You can customize those, and then you can run reports based on tags. You can run reports based on different types of memos. So it's really good to be able to do that in a systematic way. Alternatives I've also seen is like a spreadsheet of some sort. So each dog might have a tab in an Excel spreadsheet, and that might be where staff go to enter information. Recently, I was at Greenville Humane Society in South Carolina, and they have a really nice computer screen outside of the kennel rooms or actually it's a TV screen rather that's hooked up to a computer, and they leave that spreadsheet open, and the staff can just go in and tab over to the dog and then enter notes there. So that's another way that you can do it. And so why do we want to track that data? How is that useful? Because if we are able to, again, find these dogs who are maybe doing really well, and then all of a sudden there's a blip in the FAS, it's easier to kind of why and dive into that. If we see a dog who's just consistently remaining in one place, it's giving us information that that dog is continuing to remain stable, for lack of better words, in the shelter system. If we have a dog who's kind of ping-ponging all over the place, that can be a flag of some type of behavioral intervention needed. We can look further into, is it the time of day? Is it the person who's interacting with them? Is it the dog who moved in next door to them? Like that's one I see pretty frequently. Like a dog is relatively stable, and then a dog moves in next to them that is driving them crazy, or maybe you've got 2 unaltered males who are all of a sudden in kennels next to each other, and we might be, in the day to day, things get so lost in the hustle and bustle, it can be really hard to be like, well, when did this start? When did he start having a lot more trouble in the kennel or displaying more kennel stress behavior? And if we're tracking this dog's behavior over a time, and then you're able to correlate it with a specific date or an event, that can be super helpful. So when we take all of that information and then we utilize that into our leadership meetings, which is why I feel it's very important that we have folks in, especially when we're talking about behavior, we need to involve usually our medical team. If we have separated, daily care team is separate from the behavior team. At least the management people who are talking about this dog's outcome and this dog's care in the shelter, we want to have that similar language. And having those tools that make sense to everybody and have that universal language can make those conversations a lot easier. And they're more objective, so it can feel less emotional, especially as we're going into talking about potential behavioral euthanasia if a dog is declining, or is displaying behavior that's not safe, or is potentially not safe for the community, or even it could be something that is a quality of life, a super separation anxiety, whatever it might be. We can have a nice objective conversation about it. And then we are coming to those meetings with some data that is, you know, largely objective. And again, we shouldn't be basing any decision just on numbers. I think we all know at this point that context matters, that situations matter, how things happen matter. All of those things matter, But if we can also see patterns and trends, that's another tool to add to the plate. It shouldn't supersede necessarily anything else, but we've got that kind of in our repertoire of tools in our toolbox when we're having to make some of these more challenging decisions. So the other thing that I do like to use the FAS scoring charts for, is behavior modification. So let's talk specifically about what we might be thinking about when we're doing a behavioral modification session with a dog. So if you have a trainer that comes in or your staff is trained to do specific things, one of what we want to be able to track is the behavior modification training working, or are we wasting our time because the behavior is sustaining in the same way that it was, or is the dog trending downwards? So when I'm working on putting together programs for shelters, the first thing I like to do is come up with a short template for folks to finish and write out when they're done with a training session with a dog. In the past, I've used different systems like green, yellow, red. Like green means the session went great. Yellow means the session was like, okay. And red meaning like everything went terrible and not bad as in behaviorally, as in the specific thing that we were working on. So like if I was working on loose leash walking, and the goal was to get the dog to walk in a heel position or next to you with a loose leash, and the dog was in front of you like 80% of the time, I'd mark that session as red, as in we did not accomplish the thing. But the next thing that we should be looking at would be where the dog is at and learning that skill. So in addition to kind of marking how well the behavior session went, so as far as skill acquisition, so let's see. So you could use the green, yellow, red system. You could use a 1, 2, 3, 4 system. Like whatever you want to do. Went really well is also fine. I usually like to then put what the skill set we were working on. So and I think 2 to 3 at a time is your max. Especially for a dog in a shelter. And if we're doing, let's say, a 20 to 25-minute session, we might be able to squeeze in all three of those behaviors with breaks in between. Most dogs are learning in 1 to 2 minutes is kind of your best snapshot at teaching and at reinforcing a new behavior. And then you got to take a break and let them kind of regroup so you can play in between and then maybe bump to your next thing. So if I was working on an emergency U-turn, so that's a dog hitting the end of the leash and coming back to me. So that's the behavior. We've got 4 kind of stages of learning, and it's going to be acquisition, acquisition. Oh my gosh, it's been so long since I recited these. Acquisition, automation, generalization, and maintenance. So acquisition is just learning. Automation is the dog's kind of starting to figure it out. They're like, I can do it in the classroom with this handler, with these treats, right? So it's like very specific to the context, but they're able to do it without necessarily prompting it, or they're doing it very easily on cue. Generalization means you go out to the parking lot, the dog's able to perform the behavior just as good as they did in the classroom. And then maintenance means you're kind of able to do it anywhere, and the dog doesn't necessarily mean reinforcement. So when we're working on shelter behavior modification, these are the things that we like to track. So I personally like to note like how did the session go on like a 1 to 3? Where were they at? What was the behavior work on? So emergency U-turn. Where are they in their learning during this session? So how do they perform? And I usually do 1, 2, 3, 4 for those 4 stages of learning. So, or you could just write out acquisition, automation, generalization, maintenance. And then other things that I want to know for a BMOD session is going to be what was going on, where were you in the shelter, what time of day it was, that, was it just after lunch, or just after enrichment? They might be less food motivated or whatever. So time of day matters. Location of where the session is matters. And then I want to know, again, I want to go back to the FAS score, because there are some times in which the dog is doing really great. And then there's other times in which they might get really stressed. So if we're looking at that template, we are going to see, and then I always want to know what reinforcements did you use. So if you have multiple trainers working with the same dog, they can look at the previous notes and know which preference the dog has. So like those are the most important things. I don't really need all those other details necessarily. If people want to write two or three sentences about other things going on, that's fine. Um, but yeah, so I might say like, okay, so when it's like this dog is being taken out in the afternoon, they seem pretty calm out in the play yard or, fenced in area. The dog is generally at an FAS of like a one, maybe a two, because most shelter dogs are stressed. I just assume most of them are between a one and a two at all times. General assumption, obviously. And then the next thing that I want to know is like what distractions are going on. And then if that's good, that's great. And then if we see another handler takes them out, this is a big one for dogs who are on behavioral medication. So if you have dogs who are on trazodone or gabapentin and they got their medications at 8 and you're taking them out for training at 8:45 and those medications aren't on board yet, and all of a sudden we've got a dog who is like hitting a 3 or a 4 during their training, we can actually narrow down the best time to work with that dog during acquisition is going to be at a time in which the medications are on board and maybe they've already been to play group or have already been out for like an exercise one-on-one and they're just better in the afternoon. Then we can work on acquisition in the afternoon. And then when we want to generalize that behavior, we might jump to trying that stuff in the morning because then we're making it harder, right? We're like increasing that criteria. So again, going back to understanding like where that dog's stress level is on a trajectory is going to be really, really helpful. And then again, when you're looking at it from a management perspective, a bird's eye view, being able to see just the numbers. And then when you see something that looks weird, you're like, well, wait a second, what was going on? Oh, like the FedEx truck showed up in the parking lot when they were working on a session, and that sent the dog to a 5 reactive when we've never seen that before. That is a conversation to have, especially when we're looking at potentially placement. So, it's really important. To just kind of consider all of these things. And that's why I love the fear-free shelters and I love this and I would love to see it more standardized in shelters is not only are we using it for daily care and for staff understanding and all of that, but like it's a great system that everybody is already learning and like why not just implement it? I always try to find the thing that is going to be the easiest and most efficient to implement at every shelter I'm working with because why reinvent the wheel if it exists already? So Anissa, that's great. It's a great point about meds. We try to think about that at our shelter. We don't always know as volunteers if a dog is on a medication, if the meds were passed out, and if the meds were actually ingested. Yeah, that is definitely a really critical piece that your leadership team should be working on with you. And it's something to bring up with them and say, hey, like it would be really helpful if you could just post a list of dogs who are on behavioral medications and what time they're being given. Because that onboarding period does take time. And it's also very important to know the half-life. So if they're being given trazodone at 6 a.m. and at 2:30 in the afternoon, all of a sudden the dog is pinging off the walls and their dinner isn't until 5, we have an idea of why that dog is pinging off the walls at 2:30. I also see this with clomipramine because that has a tendency to um, control it's like a blood. I'm not a vet, so I can't really talk too much about it, but from my basic understanding is that it has blood pressure control. So, or it dampens blood, whatever it does. It's more physiological than your typical kind of SSRI. And it's also something that comes on and can go off really quickly. So I have seen dogs who just at 2 in the morning, all of a sudden the meds drop off and it's like out the so again like if we have that information and we're tracking it, it's really helpful not only for behavior modification in shelter care and all of that stuff, and then now you can use it for play groups as well. So yeah, so I think that this is kind of just what I wanted to talk about today. If anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. I think that's the end mostly of what I planned. And I hope that you guys have thought about this or thinking about ways to implement it because I just think it's really cool. I'm a nerd, so data to me is really Not just fun, but it gives you a better sense of your sense of control. Doesn't mean we have control, but a better sense of control of like what's happening from a broader perspective. So if anybody has any more thoughts about that, oh, Rebecca, I saw yours and somehow I just closed out of all my windows at the same time, and I have to figure out how to use. There we go. I'm back. Are you helping or hindering if you have a dog, if you're working on a behavior session, would you want to be in an environment that would have less distraction? So avoid the front run by the parking lot so we don't have distractions, or is it a good thing to see how they react or focus on lack thereof? So I think that's a good question. It's a combination of two things. I think when you're initially assessing a dog, if you need to, obviously if the dog comes in and you know they have a history of reactivity, we may not need to know or further assess it. We can just start working on it. And then, yes, whenever you're teaching a new behavior, you want to function within what we call the three Ds, which is duration, distraction, and distance. Distance is usually your first one, especially when it is an emotional response. The closer you are to something that you don't like, the harder it's going to be for you to stay focused on what you're trying to do. So you can't throw, I guess if you just start working with them in front of the stimuli, unless the dog has some incredible resilience, you run the risk of them becoming conflicted about training, conflicted about food, them failing the training session, which doesn't feel good for anybody, and it's increasing FAS. Right. So generally what we want to do, so let's say we have a dog who is reactive on leash. Emergency U-turn is a great one. That's why I threw that example out there. Let's say we want to work on Leslie McDevitt's 1, 2, 3 pattern game. Uh, or even let's break it down further. Hand target. I want to go to a quiet room and practice hand targeting. And again, what by the time you get a dog out of a kennel and get them to a room, and they really can only learn in a very, especially a dog if they have had no history of training. So you've taken in a dog who's lived on a chain for the first year of its life and like just has no idea what training even is. Getting that dog out of there and into the space. Their training sessions initially are going to be so short. You might even just have to teach them how to take food because they're like, oh, you're giving me food. That's so great. Not even understand that you're trying to get them to accomplish a task other than eating or figuring out how to get the food from you, and that can be frustrating. So we really want to break it down so it's so easy. So I usually figure out for that particular dog, I do one trial and error training session. I take them to a quiet room. What can you do? What can't you do? Do you know how to do training, etc.? And then that gives me an idea for like how I prepare the next session. So if it is a dog who is like mildly reactive, maybe so we do a quick training session, we go out in the parking lot, walk past some dogs, no big reaction, but seem a little worried. I'm thinking the next session, I'd like to maybe do that again, practice some new behaviors, go for a walk and be really far away from the other dogs and see if they can do those behaviors with dogs in proximity, but not like on top of them. So that's kind of the way that I usually like that first session's a troubleshooting session, and then I go from there. But what's really great if you have multiple people working with dogs and they're taking those notes and everybody is consistently using the same template, so it's really clear to everybody like where they were with the learning, what type of reinforcements they liked, what distractions could they do those things in, where their stress level was. It's really easy to just kind of pick up from where somebody left off instead of reinventing the wheel when you take that dog out. So yeah, so I feel like I missed something. Oh, so if we're working on the hand target, right? Okay, so we're going to a calm room. We have our reinforcements. We're trying a couple things. I want to have at least two other skills I'm working on with that dog because they get bored just like we do of doing the same task repetitively, and then they zoom out even faster because they have the capacity of like a 3-year-old child cognitively, emotionally, like they're basically stuck at 3. So you're thinking of how long you need to do something to keep a toddler's attention. That's basically where we're at. So I usually like to think of 3. So for like a reactive dog, I might want an orientation exercise. So that could be a hand target, Leslie McDevitt's up down game. We might do a look at me kind of thing. So orientation exercise. I like to then have an emergency exercise. So like a get out of dodge. This is again for reactive dogs. So I'm thinking emergency U-turn. I'm thinking middle, like get between my legs. I might be thinking turn around and move away. So instead of just getting the dog to U-turn back to you, it might be like okay, like your reactivity level is so high, we need distance immediately. Let's work on teaching the dog to turn around and actually come past you, and then you follow them out. So that would be my emergency exercise for like an uh-oh, we ran into a dog. What do we do? Because these are transferable skills that you can teach adopters who might be potentially adopting this dog to utilize in their home. So in the shelter, it's going to be really hard to modify reactivity. They're surrounded by other dogs. But if we can work on these skills that are transferable to potential adopters, that's what's going to help. And then the other thing that I usually like to work on is some type of settle exercise. So whether that's like go to a place or go to a mat or like settle between my legs, or I'm going to sit in a chair and you're going to settle next to me. And not you're gonna, I'm asking you to. I like to ask dogs to do things. That is definitely, those are the three layers that I like to add in. Settle on a mat is going to be something everybody uses in their home. Like, I'm cooking dinner. Can you please get out of the kitchen? Why don't you go lay on your mat? We're watching TV. Can you go settle on your mat while I'm doing that? Settle next to me. So yeah, so those are the three. So when you're doing that documentation, you want to start somewhere where you're pretty low key, and then you want to generalize that out. The best you're really going to get to in shelters, depending on how long they're there, is usually automation. Hopefully, if it's under 3 weeks, generalization probably is going to take 3 weeks to 5, 6 weeks, depending on how much work they're getting. This is like 2 to 3 VMOD sessions a week, give or take. And I guess it depends obviously on the behavior, but that's a general timeline. Maintenance in a shelter is just almost unattainable, because that's a hard thing to get in a shelter and it takes time. Um, Rebecca, one more thing. I'm a volunteer coordinator and I would love to get my volunteers on board with fear-free courses. Do you know of any good handouts, links, or specific courses that are good for volunteers handling animals? Well, the Fear Shelters course is a really good one. And then Trish McMillan, I think on her website still has like her defensive handling course. It's actually interesting because this is something that I might be working on as a bigger project potentially down the road, is just basic shelter handling, how to hold the leash, where your treat pouch should be, how to deliver treats. I think how you're delivering treats is very important, and it can be really complicated. One of the things that I do see in shelters quite a bit is they're handed treats in a treat pouch, which is great. I love that we're using food in shelters. The dog jumps on someone and then they toss the treats to move the dog down. And then that happens repetitively, and the dog learns that jumping actually gets them the treats, or even potentially biting. I have seen that where we've accidentally reinforced the biting, right? Reinforcement works by getting a behavior and then rewarding it. And then the reward is creating that systematic loop of like, I'm going to do it again because that was rewarding for me. So, if we are not teaching the dog to like get down and then reinforce them maybe for on the cue of getting down, or we're maybe reinforcing the loose leash walking or reinforcing four on the floor, but we're waiting for the dog to jump and then throw treats down as a scatter or something like that. The dog's like, oh, hey, that was really cool. So yeah, so Rebecca, I think that one of the best things to do for volunteers is teach them treat delivery and action and consequence for dogs. And by consequence, I mean when they're getting reinforcement. And I don't know, I'd have to look into that. I don't know off the top of my head, other than like dog training 101 courses. But I do think that there is a lack of that for shelters. And one of the best things that I love to do is teach volunteers how to do this stuff. At some of the shelters that I've worked with, part of their volunteer or onboarding, what we did was they have a trainer on site. And so for a part of the onboarding process, I think when they get to yellow handler level, which would be the next up from green, is they do a yellow handling orientation. And then that trainer comes in and does treat speed, location of reinforcements, how to reinforce, different ways to reinforce with food. And then they don't really talk as much about toys because that can be, depending on the dog, a little more niche and stuff. So those dogs that are not food as food motivated and are really toy drivey tend to end up being dogs that need higher level handlers regardless. So um Yeah, look what Trish has, and then otherwise, just email me and I'll keep that on my radar because maybe I can make a quick video for the Facebook group or something. I have all these great ideas and then I never write them down. So if any of you guys ever have ideas or resources you're looking for, please feel free to shoot me a message in the group or shoot me an email. And I'm more than happy to just kind of add it to my list of things. I will get to them. When I get to them, I'm not sure, but it's really nice to have ideas. I'm really bad at coming up with my own ideas. I love prompts because it really gets my creativity. And then I'm like, oh yeah, of course. So yeah, that'd be great. Okay, if anybody else has any other questions, please drop them in the chat. I hope that this was a fun conversation and gets your gears going a little bit. I really think that we have a lot of tools in our shelter systems. It's just that we don't have time. We don't have energy sometimes, and but these are things that we can implement pretty easily, especially if we have everybody. Oh, there's somebody in the waiting room coming in. Especially if we're kind of see, that's why I was trying to get rid of the waiting room because it pulls me out of my brain thought. Okay, so especially if we're busy and we have all these things, but everybody's already taken this fear-free shelters course, it's like a really easy insert into your observation lists. So all right, Alexis, I'm sorry, I don't know how long you were in the waiting room, but I did not see you there. So I'm going to be posting the recording pretty quickly after this one. So that's that. A couple updates, I guess things coming up rather. We have John on Monday from Humane Innovations. He's going to be coming on to, I'll get rid of this. Let me stop sharing my screen. There we go. He is going to be coming onto the Lawless Off Leash for us to talk about handling dogs safely in shelters and some tricks, tips, and tools that we can utilize. He's got an amazing amount of experience from his career. So I'm really looking forward to that. And let's see, what was it? Oh yeah, the shelter playgroup course. So I have, I think, 8 spots left for my next mentorship. So if you or anybody in your team is interested, there are those 8 spots left. And if your shelter wants multiple people to come, I do a group discount. So you guys can just shoot me an email if you're thinking about having multiple people sign up. And that's going to be really fun, and I can't wait for it. And otherwise, I will see you guys next week, and I will be sitting in an airport in Colorado Springs. Sorry, I had to think about that for a second. I was like, not Denver, Colorado Springs. So I'll be sitting there waiting for a flight to get home. So I'll see you guys from there. Okay. Well, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week and a good weekend, and I'll see you all next week. Bye.